All right. Good evening. Tonight we are going to be discussing the spiritual state of South Africa. So I was inspired by my conversation with my buddy in the UK, Lambda. I thought maybe we'd sort of go around the globe and discuss the spiritual state of other places. So I figured it was probably good to look closer to home for the next one and not be accused of Anglophilia. So we'll be talking about South Africa today. If you are new to the program, thank you very much for coming. Welcome. We're just going to wait a little bit for some people to show up. Quick plugs before we get started. I have recently started, I've been approved after a few weeks for a Subscribestar account. So if you wish to donate to the show, you are encouraged to help me buy nappies and provender and things like that. So you can find the link directly below for Subscribestar. There's also a PayPal link. So if you want to make a recurring or one-off donation, that would certainly be welcome as well. In addition, if you want to have an alternative to Super Chats, what I'll be doing during the show is I have the PayPal link. You could just send that in with a comment. And if you wish to be anonymous, just mention that in the front of your message. And I'll be happy to answer any questions via PayPal or Super Chat that you may have for Russell or myself. So, yeah, what's up, reprobates? Yeah, from my old compadre, Reactionary Opinions. There we go. So anyways, yeah, so Russ, first off, we're joined by a friend of mine, Russell. So you want to tell the people a little bit about yourself, man?
Hi, good evening. Yes, like I said, I'm a known Mr. Patriarch here. First of all, I'm very honored to be for the first time guest on his show. And yeah, I'm excited about being part of the show and sharing a bit of my knowledge on the show. Bit about myself. I've known Dylan for a couple of years. Since he moved out here and got married. I've been living in Cape Town for about almost 20 years now. And I'm going to be speaking tonight about the basics, sort of outline of Christianity in South Africa as I see it. I'm not a qualification is I'm not an academic or even a church leader. I'm a straight layman, so it's all going to be layman's talk now. From the ordinary, what would be considered the ordinary churchman's perspective, as a grassroots perspective on things, and that's what kind of I'm hoping to bring across here tonight.
Awesome. And are you involved in like sort of your church leadership at the church you go to, Russell?
No. I don't hold any sort of official office, but I am active and a strong participator. Awesome.
Cool. The South African record power lifter as well. Yeah. Yeah. Russell sent us some photos a little while back. Apparently he did pretty good at a lifting competition in Somerset West. Were you setting records there or anything, Russell?
Yeah, it's not a look, put it this way, there's different federations, and that's a small federation. So let's just put it this way. Not so much that I broke record, I improved their records for them, So
nice. That's a good gentlemanly way to put it. Yeah, he's living. He's those one of those right-wing dudes who lifts lots of weights and all that sort of stuff. Real retrograde. So, all right, and we got another one from Sam Squatch, Northwest. Morning, folks. Good to have you here. All right, cool. So I guess sort of let's get started now. Before we begin, just real quick, how would you, because my audience is sort of, we got people all over the map. So we got some Orthodox people, we got some Catholic people, quite a few Catholics listen to me, Protestants as well. So it's sort of like it's a very ecumenical audience I think we have. So how would you describe your denominational beliefs or whatever?
Well, I mean, I would say that if I've got a term for the church that I belong to. I've got a term for it. I call it post-Protestant. Basically past Protestantism. Even Protestantism is a little bit outdated for my church. So it's not necessarily my belief, but that's the kind of it's a supposedly a non-denominational church, but you as soon as you give a church a building, a leadership, and a name, it becomes a denomination. So if I had to describe it, the way I would describe it is post-Protestant.
Nice. Post-Protestant. All right, cool. So let's begin. So first off, number one, quick rundown. So most of my audience is in the United States and the UK. So a lot of them probably don't have much of an idea about sort of the history of Christianity within South Africa. So could you run that by the people real quick? Brief history of Christendom in South Africa.
I think the very first, if I'm correct here, the very first sort of Christian activity in what is modern day South Africa was probably the Portuguese at Cape Agulhas. That would have been Vasco da Gama. It's quite possible. I remember hearing, I'm not entirely sure, I think they had a communion service at Cape Agulhas in 1490 or 1520 or somewhere around there. So that's actually that's the first Christian activity recorded in South Africa was, I think, Vasco da Gama at Cape Agulhas all those centuries ago. And and I think for hundreds of years, for a couple of hundred years, nothing really happened at from a Christian point of view in South Africa until about the middle of the 17th century, when the Dutch VOC company established a trading port and refresher station at Cape Town in Table Bay, what is today Cape Town, not too far from where I stay. And obviously, that brought a lot of Christians for the first time to actually settle and actually partake in Christian activity on the modern day South Africa's land surface, what we understand geographically today. And I think obviously there are recordings of the original VOC members and that sort of thing also conducting one of their first things before they did anything at the Cape. They also conducted a church service of sorts. There's records of them having a church service immediately within a day or two of arriving, to kind of say thanks for ask God to bless them at the Cape for the blessing of the safe travel, etc. So that was essentially the early Christian influence at the Cape. Now, obviously, this went on for, I think, the Dutch VOC brought out ministers to the obviously from Holland to the Cape, and they established churches out here in various areas of the Cape for the next, I think it was about the next 120 odd years. Various church denominations, various churches and mission stations were established in the greater sort of Cape Town area. The Dutch VOC weren't extremely expansive. They didn't go really past the Hottentots Holland Mountains, which is basically Somerset West.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah. They didn't go very far. They weren't very expansionist.
So they went from where you stay to where I stay, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, essentially. And then around to Stellenbosch. So about 50, 60, 70, 80 Ks inland, from Cape Town. That's about as far as they went in 150 odd years, which is, I suppose, a fair distance back in those days. But I think what happened was, another event that happened was that you had the first trekboers who actually left the Cape and actually established their own settlement in Craafrenet. Was the next main sort of outpost of Christianity in South Africa, besides Cape Town, going into the mid 18th century, 1700, 1770, around there, 1780, 1790, around there somewhere. They established the town of Craafrenet, which became the like another outpost of Christianity. And then in about the early 19th century, I think 1810, the British, or 1805, the British occupied the Cape after the Battle of Blouberg. And obviously now you had what you had previously. You had Dutch influence, and now you would have English influence at the Cape and throughout the Cape Colony, as it was then. And what happened then is the British occupation had, obviously, there was a lot of alienation with over the years with the policies of Anglicization, trying to get the trekboers to basically become Englishmen. There was, that was trying to be forced a bit too much. And eventually what happened was the British actually conceded. Eventually they said, okay, well, look, you don't need to, we'll still send you ministers, but we'll send you ministers from Scotland rather than ministers from Holland. Okay. Thinking that obviously, because the denomination, the Scottish ministers, many of them trained in Utrecht. The Scottish ministers, the Presbyterian ministers, trained in Utrecht, making them more Protestant, like a harder Protestantism than, say, what the English would have brought over with their Anglican views and what have you, and more Calvinistic type views. So the Dutch speakers at the Cape kind of conceded that. They said, kind of thinking, okay, well, look, we'll still get our doctrines, we like them preached to us, and that they kind of made that concession. But what the English didn't realize at the Cape was that the Scottish ministers essentially met their congregations where they were at in the far areas and basically started preaching in Dutch anyway. So the
Scottish ministers went native, essentially.
Yeah, essentially the Scottish ministers went native, and they that's the likes of Andrew Murray Sr., Andrew Murray, the famous biblical Christian author Andrew Murray. This is who we're referring to mainly. We're using him as an example, but he was one of a few at the time. They were based in Craafrenet, incidentally, as I mentioned earlier. So there's always been the development of, so what I'm getting at is that the development of South Africa has always kind of followed in the church has always followed in the wake of South Africa's development, closely in behind it. As it developed, there was always the church with it. Church came along everywhere. In about 1837, 1838 was the great trek of the trekkers into the interior from the Eastern Cape. All right. And that essentially spread, that was very useful in spreading the gospel throughout South Africa. It took the gospel to the great trek. Yeah, was up until then, the actual spreading of the gospel had been very, very slow. Actually, well, I'm saying slow. It's those days. It would have moved slow. We can't expect it to move as quickly as it does today.
So it seems like mostly the spread of Christianity sort of went as they peopled the land, or essentially. So as they went out and established areas, they would sort of bring Christianity with them and maybe sort of rub it off on some of the natives that they came in contact
well, look,
with.
in the Cape,
wasn't like,
in about the Cape, one thing I forgot to mention, in the Cape, where we are now, essentially within like 100 odd years or 120, 150 years of occupation here, the Khoi and Khoi San were basically decoupled from their tribal roots. They were fully Christianized and evangelized. So within about 150 years, I think they were completely decoupled from their ancestral tribal Aboriginal roots. They'd been thoroughly evangelized already. So they would move. That was generally the pattern that took place, particularly down here in the Cape. But even when they moved to the Eastern Cape, the San, or Bushmen, they were also evangelized a lot. They also, a lot of them also became Christian and were baptized. And then, as I mentioned, when you got the Great Track moving into the interior, that also spread the gospel and the Christian message amongst the Bantu peoples as well. The Bantu peoples of South Africa, the Black African people of South Africa. Because up until that point, there had been no real up until about 1800, 1830 or so, there'd been very little interaction between white Europeans and, the different African tribes. And the Great Track, essentially, as they moved into the interior, they evangelized many and established mission stations across the greater interior of South Africa. The trekkers were very good at spreading themselves very thin. So they spread themselves out very, very far and wide. So farms were incredibly isolated, and towns were very isolated.
A Dorpy there.
That's why you see if you drive through the Free State, and the eastern and other parts of the country in South Africa, you'll see a small town every 50 to 60 k's. There'll be something. It's from that. That's so. Look, I mean, the thing is, and then in the late 19th century, from about 1860 onwards, it really started to take off. Evangelism was incredibly strong in South Africa. This is now the days when Reverend Andrew Murray's ministry was starting to get into full swing in South Africa, down in the Cape, up into the old Transvaal, Free State. It was really starting to take off from about 1850, 1860 onwards. We had David Livingstone come out to South Africa back then as well in that period. So it was an incredible time of Christian evangelism and Christian influence in South Africa, right? And I would think by about 1890, the turn of the 20th century, South Africa had already been thoroughly evangelized, and all the people groups had been reached with the message of the Lord Jesus Christ, and I think all the people groups had been met, but had received the gospel by then already. 1890, I think, maybe even before that. So that's the old history. And then obviously, in the 20th century, the church still worked. The church also, in the 20th century, South Africa became a mission-sending country as well. Many other missionaries left South Africa and went further abroad to other parts of Africa to work at mission stations there, right up to Nigeria and Congo, lots of Angola. So South Africa actually started exporting a lot of ministers all over the world, and particularly to other parts of Africa as well. South Africa, and then obviously, like in most places in the world, the 20th century was quite a difficult period. Like, I wouldn't say a period where nothing happened in the church in South Africa. It didn't have that type of. It was very settled and it was very established, let's put it that way, in the 20th century. And it kind of it meandered along. It became very mature in the 20s, in the 20th century. Let's put it that way. So we all basically in South Africa, all Christian denominations are represented quite across the board spectrum. You've got, yeah, look, that's and today, you know, Christianity is a very established. It is very established in South Africa. A lot of people, foreign visitors who from like the UK or the US or something, will actually comment about South Africa, and they said, oh, they didn't realize that South Africa was as, you know, spiritually active as it actually is on the ground. They would never have thought that, because it's kind of like a silent. It's basically silent throughout the rest of the world. It's not like if you really know that, you know. But they said, oh, well, it's actually quite fertile and quite active. You know, it's not in South Africa. I mean, they're not closing church doors in South Africa.
Oh, that's certainly true. I had a friend of mine who runs sort of the Bible study that I go to. He's an interesting story. He was baptized and raised marginally Eastern Orthodox, and then he converted to Pentecostalism. And he was a Pentecostal for most of his life. And then he came here to South Africa to do mission work. And then eventually he he reconverted back to Eastern Orthodoxy. And as a priest from Johannesburg put it, they said, "Cristo, I like you. You're Orthodox, but you think like a Protestant." And because he's got that sort of zeal of, that you sort of get with Pentecostalism and sort of stuff. But anyways, he was remarking to me that when he came to South Africa, he was very, and he came to South Africa, I guess, in the late 90s, mid late 90s, I think, or the early 2000s. It was about 20 years ago or more. And he remarked as well, coming from London, that South Africa was a much more Christianized country still than what he was accustomed to in the UK.
Yeah, that is a common comment of people who come out from the UK to South Africa. You know, they I've heard that mentioned on numerous occasions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's sort of the history of Christianity in South Africa. Now, sort of broadly speaking, what is the foreign perspective coming from a sort of post-Christian, liberalized, thoroughly secular Western culture, like in Europe or certain parts, particularly coastal America? They'll come to South Africa and they'll sort of get the impression that it's a very Christian country still. And I guess relative to places like that, it is. But what would you say is the current state of Christianity within the country, broadly speaking? Meaning, what is the vitality of the church and sort of how and the condition of the faith of the people within the country?
Yeah, well,
and maybe outside pressures as well.
Well, look, I'm not going to pin a state of the church definitively. But I will say that no matter what, it's you can't say exactly definitely, okay, the church is in ascendancy or the church is in decline. It's actually very, very difficult to tell. I think what is happening in South Africa is that the existing church is growing stronger. It might not be growing larger, but it is growing stronger. Right, and I'm talking about in a very, very broad sense, in an overall sense across the spectrum. So what I'm personally believe is that although the church isn't getting better, getting bigger, it's getting better. I think that is going to be that is the current sort of trajectory we're on, and I think there are problems, yes, throughout the spectrum, but I would say, if I could summarize it, that's how I would best describe it. And you say, what were the other questions you had as well? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there.
Oh, no problem. So yeah, the other part would be the current state of the church, broadly speaking, and also sort of maybe the faith of the average churchgoer. So kind of like the as you were saying, the strength of the church, maybe the institutions are sort of, now that they're kind of being tested by various things like COVID, government regulation, secularism and whatnot, they're maybe taking a bit more of a stand these days. But what would you say is the sort of state of faith of kind of most common people here?
Well, I think the state of the faith of people that are already living out their Christianity is actually very good. I think the average, the state of the average person not living out any type of spiritual thing or completely secular is actually quite bad, which you'd expect it to be.
Yeah.
So I think the Lord's doing His work amongst His people. Maybe not growing stronger, but growing stronger in numbers, but stronger in faith. The ones that are there are strong, and that's my kind of view. Obviously, there's all sorts of challenges in the last year. It's been, I think the church got sideswiped a lot, got taken out a lot in the last year. So I can't tell you what the effects of all these restrictions on church gatherings, because they love to, our particular government kind of loves to, there's super spreader events everywhere, minute of every day. Go down to Cape Town Station, Belleville Station, there's a super spreader event there every day, but no churches. They love to point fingers at churches, So I don't think, we'll get to that a bit later about the relationship with the state and South Africa. I've got a lot to say on that, but I think I really do believe that even if we might not have the numbers in South Africa of real fervent, faithful Christians, but the ones that are there are getting better by the day. That's my honest belief.
I think that's probably correct based off sort of my experience. And yeah, it was a really weird time this past year for South Africa. They've never had anything quite like it with these lockdowns and stuff. So for example, my church and many other churches, they essentially closed down for a while. There was that initial sort of lockdown period where they cracked down and then they opened back up. And, some people, they're leery, they're living in fear and whatnot, and they don't want to go either worship. they're a little more put off by the woo flu than potentially going to worship the Lord or partake of the sacraments. So I think, the pressures that the South African churches face is different, I would say. So the one hand, it's sort of under attack a little bit, I think, from Western culture, essentially. I mean, American culture.
Bad Western ideas.
Bad Western ideas, yeah. And I think that's sort of something they're going to have to struggle with. So I guess kind of transitioning on to kind of the next point I wanted to talk about, sort of what are the biggest difficulties Christianity faces for the different nations within South Africa. Now, I'll give you my quick opinion real quick. My opinion is that sort of for the middle class, upper middle class, urbanized folk in South Africa, they have a lot of sort of the same problems that I think you see with Western societies, generally speaking. They tend to be more so than the general population, more secular. Basically, the only atheists I've ever met are white urbanites, essentially. You don't find a lot of those in the working class colored communities or Black communities. So the problems that they have are more of the same sort of problems that you find with decadent Western societies, generally speaking. So they're comfortable, they're cushy, and relatively speaking, and they thought Richard Dawkins was hot shit in the mid 2000s, and they haven't gotten over that yet. So that's kind of their problem. The other problem, I think, with the other nations within South Africa, I'll talk about the Coloreds because that's sort of my the group I'm most familiar with, aside from the us wit mensen. Their problems are a little different. So with them, it's not so much atheism as sort of getting trapped in certain lifestyles and then sort of being dragged away from the church, essentially. So even, gangsters and whatnot, they won't really be atheists. They'll just, they'll believe in something, but it's marginal, right? So it's culturally this or that, culturally Muslim or culturally Christian in a certain sense. But with them, it's more issues of substance abuse, issues of single parenthood, issues of gangsterism, and things like that, much as you find in the American Black community, or also with Latino, certain parts of Latino communities in the Americas. So with them, it's more of, I would say, the church people there who actually attend are some of the more fervent believers that I've encountered. But the problem is there's sort of a fairly large underclass in the colored community, which is sort of kind of, it's steering them away from the faith and sort of more towards these unwholesome pastimes. And with the Black community, which I have less experience with, but it seems to me they're perhaps they're definitely more Christian, at least in some senses, than the white South Africans, whether Anglos, Boers, or Portuguese or whatever. But they have a lot of the same sort of problems that you find with the colored underclass. So basically issues, particularly in rural areas. So violence, substance abuse, and things like that are all sort of things which sort of detract from the spiritual life. And increasingly what you're seeing is that particular demographic is putting their faith less in God and more in sort of ideologies or basically political faiths, particularly among the university educated. So whether it's Marxism or, they think Julius Malema is the next Julius Caesar or something. I don't know. But that would be sort of the general problems that I would see. And and one more thing, and I'll sort of let you add in here. The other problem is, again, like I said, which we mentioned earlier, is the toxic effects of garbage American pop culture, essentially. So it's kind of creating, at least in sort of the urban areas, sort of more deracinated identity a little bit. And consumerism comes in and sort of fills the gap where traditional custom and identity would be buttressed with a faith, Christianity. And now it's kind of, because Christianity is inherently sort of a transcendent spiritual thing, when it comes in contact with this sort of materialism and aspirationalism that you get in sort of Western societies, and that sort of, I think, leads a lot of people astray. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, sort of the big three groups in South Africa?
I think you've touched on a very much a social aspect. So you've looked at the how the church is interacting within a social sort of context. which I think you've actually pretty nailed spot on. I'm not going to add too much to that. I know that I'm going to maybe add what I've heard and experienced and know about churches that operate in these situations, and this is broadly speaking for the rest amongst the African peoples, the Bantu people, speaking peoples of South Africa. Generally speaking, there is they're lacking good clergymen a lot of the time. The spiritual, the theological training, leadership, and discernment. They're really going to need the church leaders. I think there are some good ones. There are some good ones out there that are doing good work, but if it's going to get better, and if Christianity is going to really be that buttress, that force against these things, then the leaders, the church and clergymen in these communities are going to have to get a lot stronger and start. You're just going to have to find, I think, some of God is going to have to raise up greater leaders in these communities, and it's got to be done at the localized level. And I think that is a problem for the church. That is the church's responsibility, the broader church as a whole. So, for instance, a church like mine has seen the need in these communities and has started small congregations of training up people, small congregations in places like Khayelitsha and Denomination in the township urban settings, trying to impart, not to kind of remodel and change the way they must worship or something like that, but trying to bring a word of real, a real gospel and tangible, life-changing gospel message. So there's work being done, but it's a very, very uphill task, and it's a very tough ask. It's a very tough environment to minister into. It's very, very hard, and the first prize is that in your, like what you said, in the colored community. The colored community's got a number of fairly good leaders. They've raised up some good leaders in the past, some good guys, and I think I would rather have in the whole of Khayelitsha a fervent, faithful couple of hundred congregants than a church of 5,000 people who rock up on a Sunday. You know what I mean? I don't believe in I don't believe in numbers. You know what I mean?
It's the 80-20. Russell wants a church of just the 20.
I'd rather take the 20 good ones than 100 ordinaries.
Yeah,
I'll do more. You'll do more with, and I think
you literally will. Yeah.
And generally speaking, within my sort of spiritual understanding and view is that God always uses the minority. You know what I mean? It's always the minority that works with God. So that's how he operates, is through remnants, through minorities. So I don't think it's not all lost. There's good work happening, but it's an uphill battle. There's a lot of amongst sort of rogue churches. There's a lot of spiritual abuse in these churches across the board. Abuse of congregants is rife, unfortunately. But I believe that will be able to be sorted out in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's the that's the thing. I was just making the comment. See, even God believes in elite theory. Yeah. So basically, I think that's correct. I think a lot of people get humdrum about sort of the general circumstances they find themselves in, right? And it makes sense. because there is a lot of bad shit happening both here and internationally. But I think you're right. If you look at history, the Lord tends to work through fanatical, in the good sense, small groups of people to sort of make real change happen. I made a video a while ago, and in that video, I said Jesus only needed 12 people to basically Christianize, to get the ball rolling, to Christianize basically the most of the known world at the time. And I think, and that's true. I mean, and all we got to do is look at history to that. And apologies, I think my kid's banging his ukulele or something in the background. The bottom of the ukulele, man, it was a great choice. Except he thinks the tuning pegs are part of the toy as well, and then he throws it out of tune after I spend a while trying to get this piece of junk tuned up. Anyways, dad stuff. But yes, that's I think that's correct. Using minorities of fervent believers to sort of affect the wider change, and most people, are comfortable following. They've always have. It's no mistake that societies are hierarchical. People are built that way. And it's true in the church as well. So if you got good leadership and people willing to stand up and be brave and try to spread the gospel, they'll find, I would imagine they would find a lot of people who think the right thoughts, but are either timid or don't have the organizational ability or don't think they do, who will sort of step up and say, yeah, I'll help you with your program, essentially. And I think that's sort of what we need to look forward to.
Yeah, look, look, like I say, as Christians, no matter, you're never ever supposed to. It's one of those things where, when it comes to this sort of thing, Dylan, you always keep your head up and look at the problems straight on. You know what I mean? You cannot allow your head to drop and feel that the situation is overwhelming. That is the absolute worst sort of thing that can, it's at the end of the day, many Christians have forgotten the theology or the teaching or the doctrine that, hey, we always win because we have already won. So a lot of Christians are overwhelmed by the environments around them, by the upheavals around them, and the sheer magnitude of the problems, whatever they may be. They seem insurmountable. Look, like I say, we can discuss as well about the future of South Africa there, but on the future of South Africa, spiritually, etc. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. I mean, the country is probably entering quite a dark phase. I'm not a pathological positivity person. I see things for what they are. People often call me for being a Debbie Downer or a but I'm not. I'm actually positive about us going into a dark phase. What's that?
Oh no, I was just saying, yeah, Russell's one of these guys. He's like the happy doomer, essentially. So he's like, yeah, we're going to, the society's going to hell, but I'm not. And yeah. So he's very positive about, he meets the conflict head on, so to speak. And he expects it. So yeah, he's been riding the tiger these many years.
Yeah, look, it's just the way I've kind of see things. I can't bring myself to see it any other way. But I think, if it's a dark time, it's a time for the church to shine brighter. A lot of people and many Christians are feeling faint and disheartened. I won't lie. I mean, I felt quite disheartened many times and over again, but I felt disheartened, but I've actually let that to rest now. I've dealt with that, I've kind of settled that in my heart as to what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, etc. And saying, well, look, whatever happens, I'm still a Christian. I still live my life the way God wants me to live it. I still carry out His will. I still do all these things. The rest can do what it wants, but you know what I mean. I do the will of God.
No, absolutely. I was. It's funny you say that. On the way here, or no, earlier, I was picking up some food and coming home, and I had my son in the back of the car, and as I'm driving, I'm listening to Joseph de Maistre's reflections on the revolution in France or something. And Joseph de Maistre has a reputation for being a really, kind of morbid character in history and sort of reactionary thinking. But he said something which was basically exactly what you said. And he was talking about sort of the effect of the revolution on the church in France, which was sort of the revolution had sort of been ongoing at this time. I think he wrote this famous piece in the pre-Bonaparte era. So this is right before sort of Bonaparte took power, and it was just chaos and the church is being persecuted and clergy killed and stuff. And what he said was that some of the things that were happening to the church were partially deserved, essentially. He said society at that point of time had sort of gained a sort of decadence and whatnot, and the church had sort of lost its zeal and sort of lost its way and whatnot. And he saw the French Revolution as kind of a sort of divine judgment from God, almost in a certain sense. And the other thing he said is that after the revolution, what's going to happen is all the incentives will sort of line up. And so all the people who sort of wanted to sort of get into religion because it was good business, it's not going to be the case in the revolutionary society. And what's going to happen is that on the back end of this, whenever this sort of all passes over, the only Christians who are going to be left are going to be real fervent churchmen who are going to want to take the faith forward into the future and sort of use it as the ballast, as the cornerstone on which to sort of try and rebuild some semblance of a wholesome society again. And I listening to Maestro and sort of thinking about our show for tonight, I was like, yeah, that's probably where we're heading to.
That sounds pretty much like me, eh?
yeah, exactly. Russell de Maistre, exactly. So real quick, if anyone has any comments, please feel free to send us super chats, and we'll answer those first if you have any. If not, no, that's cool. And we'll sort of go through and answer any questions you have later at the end. So I guess that sort of leads us into kind of our last question about what do you think is the future of Christianity in this country? So maybe let's sort of do two things here. Let's talk about what do you think is the future of South Africa, generally speaking, and then sort of alongside that, what is the future of Christianity going forward into that future?
I think, I'm not look, South Africa is going to struggle in years to come. It's going to struggle as a whole. The country is going to struggle. And I think what I'm sincerely hoping for is that, the church is going to struggle as well for a period with the country. I mean, we're not immune to the struggles of the country. We're going to have to go through it with the church will go through the problems of South Africa with the rest of South Africa. But I think I always believe that the church will survive and become stronger as South Africa, the country, becomes weaker. I think they're going to diverge. They're going to follow each other for a while, and then eventually there's going to be a point of diversion where the church is going to be on the up, and in spite of whatever happens with South Africa. There's lots of things. Look, South Africa is an incredibly politically complex society. It's not as straightforward as anybody. It's a very difficult one to actually predict. There's lots of little scenarios that can play itself out. And I think for Christians, the most important thing is to not get too tied up in the politics of things. My advice to Christians in South Africa, all right, if we're going to have a strong church, is keep building your churches, keep preaching, keep each other up in prayer, keep each other encouraged, keep sharing the gospel, keep building your families, keep doing all these things, very much like the Israelites did in their captivity. It's even though it might not be in captivity, so to speak, but your circumstances mean that you just need to keep doing the things that you've always done. You know, we've got 2,000 years of Christianity behind us. You know, keep doing the things that Christians have always done, and faithfully and earnestly, and don't get and pray earnestly that you don't get overwhelmed by the situations, which could get quite hair-raising in this country. I'm not going to dispute that whatsoever. It could get quite hair-raising, but Christians must do what Christians have always done, is my very simple answer.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I guess sort of at this point now, we'll sort of thumb through your guys' comments if you have any. So
one comment I saw here. There's one comment I saw. Where was it? By reactionary man, you asked about church. You asked about church regulation.
Here we go. I think I see it. Oh. So most churches, is it this one? Most churches toe the line. What is Russell's thoughts on the impending licensing of churches?
Yeah. Look, some context around this. What's happening in South Africa? I mentioned spiritual abuses earlier. There's all sorts of weird stuff. I'm not going to get into the details, but a lot of this weird stuff has got it into the media and caused a bit of a raucous amongst media and a media frenzy and a kind of like a blowing this thing up at that church leadership need to become accountable to the state to prevent them from being congregants from being abused. So the state is framing themselves as, we're good people. You know, they always do this.
We're here to protect you.
We're here to protect you. You know, we're good people, you know. But basically, the long and short of it is that they want to license all the religious practitioners in South Africa. So no matter what religion you're part of, they want to establish some sort of religious practitioners body, all right, where it's like a legal the board for the attorneys or the accounting body or something like that, and you've basically got to belong to this to be able to actually have a church, all right. And the interesting thing is what they're going to do is that you can actually do yourself. So if you're interested, I've actually done the research. The people that are on the front lines of formulating this piece of legislation that they want to put through, they really do want to put it through. They're basically saying that all the codes of conduct and whatever, etc., they must be aligned with the South African Bill of Rights and Constitution. So essentially what they're doing through regulation, right? Essentially what they're doing through regulation is that every single church across all denominations will be a state church subordinated to the South African Bill of Rights and Constitution. So you can have your church, but don't forget, we're head of your church, not Christ. So it's going to be very, very interesting going forward when they bring this legislation, because there are church bodies and Christian organizations kind of in a legal battle trying to push back against this sort of thing, but I think they're going to fail. I don't think they can maybe stave it off for a while, but they are going to eventually lose the battle. That's my honest opinion. And yeah, they're going to lose the battle, and it's going to be. I just really sincerely hope that Christians in their congregations hold their leaders accountable and say, no, you're not. If you become a state minister, we're leaving, we're out, we're gone. So it could have a dramatic effect on church membership, and it could cause a massive upheaval. But that's a good thing. I believe this is a positive thing. We need something to really shake Christians up, and that will hopefully shake them up, into the realities of their situation. If basically, I can tell you right now, if my church becomes an official practicing church, I'll be gone. I won't be there. I don't know what I'll do. I'll meet with other Christians and believers in the park or something like that, or I'll have an unofficial church like they do in China. But I'm not lending my ears to a state preacher.
You'll drive up Old Kapseweg and have some sort of hermitage up in the mountains or something.
Well, listen, I'll meet in a park or so. I don't care. I'll find some other way of congregating for church. And I sincerely believe that, and sincerely hope that, and also, I mean, eventually, if you can't have a church, why do you have church buildings? So the government can also take your property there as well. We've got expropriation without compensation on the books by then. So get what I'm saying? Put two and two, connect the dots, people. Connect the dots. You get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
And I'm actually looking forward to this. Strangely enough, I'm actually so enthusiastic about all this bad news.
It's funny you say that, because the last one of these I did, I was talking with a guy who's a Christian in England. And he was sort of saying the same thing. He's like, you know what? I honestly kind of hope in a weird way that the government just sort of takes the mask off and tries to oppress the churches, because then that'll be a great opportunity for a lot of people to just sort of say, no, you're not going to do this, and really sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. So that sounds a bit sort of like what you're talking about. It's an opportunity.
Look, like I say, what did God tell Gideon? He said, you got too many soldiers. Otherwise you're going to get the credit. You've got far too many soldiers. You got too many.
Exactly.
You need to get rid of some. Donnie says here, will the state dictate what the pastors preach? Yes, indeed, because they will dictate, because they have to subordinate their teachings and everything to the South African Bill of Rights. So the South African Bill of Rights and the Bible are very much in conflict. So
yeah, yes, they are.
They are very much in. We will talk about it, but that's going to have a massive impact as well. So essentially, we're going to have a secular church. There's going to be no real church left. By stroke of a pen, by writing a law. Yeah. But we're not persecuting the church. Look, they're practicing. But that's exactly
they have their buildings.
They have their buildings. So what you actually need to do is Christians need to actually not just show that they're being persecuted, and actually not even rock up to church and say we can't go to church anymore because we're not allowed to have church, so that it actually looks like persecution. Because the government will say, but you can still go to church, you can still preach it. No, but we can't preach what we've always preached for 2,000 years. Get what I'm saying? We can't. Right. It's not the church anymore. They're very clever. I mean, the thing is, what these commies are like. They're very clever at all this stuff. They love this type of obstruification. You know what I mean? They love it.
Speaking of, we got a nice comment here from Daniel van Straten. Critical race theory, social justice is a big problem in NSA Church. Who is addressing this? And I think this sort of ties into a little bit what we were talking about with this licensing issue. So what's your take on that, Russell?
I think that critical race theory, social justice, wokeness thing, it's present in the church, in the broader sort of church. It's there, but it hasn't got to the stage where it's overrun, sort of run like wildfire within the church. A couple of vocal individuals, but have been pretty much, who get a lot of game time, who get a lot of airtime, but generally amongst the broader congregants of the South African church basically get slapped down, you know what I mean, by the average person, by the the church as a whole. But it's there. It's but we're not going to need critical race theory is going to be, and social justice and all that sort of thing is going to be forced on the church via this licensing and regulation anyway in the future. And that's also, so it's there already, without the regulation, but it's going to be there again with this regulation, even harder. But I don't think that wokeness is a massive. It's in South Africa churches, but it's not.
Yeah,
it hasn't exploded. It hasn't exploded.
Yeah, no, I would say oddly enough, and maybe I'm not experienced enough, but my impression is that that kind of woke social justice thing is actually, oddly enough, much more common in American and Western churches than it actually is in South Africa, even among the Black churches or the colored churches. Like, I've never heard like a like a social justice sermon in a Protestant colored church, and I've attended a number of them, and you just don't get that vibe at all. It may be in some of the Black churches, but again, I also get the feeling that's not the case. If you get it anywhere, again, it's again probably the upper middle class whiteys who would be peddling this sort of stuff.
I think a lot of this wokeness it's not amongst the churches in Cape Town. It's here, but I think I don't know what it is, but this wokeness thing seems to be a big Johannesburg thing. I don't know what it is. I think it's a Joburg thing.
It's probably because it's the center of African finance. I don't know.
Finance,
maybe
yeah.
The finance. Yeah. All the money's there. Ooh. Where there's money, there's, well, no, never mind. So let's continue. From Daniel van Straten. Will the state dictate what pastors preach? It seems like it, or it seems like that's what they want to a certain extent, or maybe they'll sort of dress it up. It may start off as sort of like maybe some sort of body where you can report offenses. So if your pastor is saying, the Lord gave me a vision last night and I had all the beautiful women of my congregation as concubines, where you can sort of report issues like that. But I have no doubt, due to the nature of the South African state, that with time, there'll be certain things which will be considered, hate preaching or whatever. And that will inevitably, I think, happen.
Look, they're very good at obstrutification and smoke and mirrors and lies and deceits and all sorts of things. They'll throw all sorts of smoke screens up, and just always remember who you're dealing with here. And that's another problem with Christians, especially the Christian church in South Africa, is that they're incredibly gullible. They are incredibly gullible with regards to the state in South Africa. They believe everything these guys say. It's unbelievable.
No, I would say that is the one big problem. So they're not woke, but they're much, much too trusting of the state, generally speaking. So they're not SJWs, but their deference, or their I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart, but their willingness, that's the word, their willingness to sort of go along with government regulation and take it at face value, I think, is a big problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, I've had this discussion with Christians, is that they really so badly want to believe that the government is doing things in their best interest. They so badly want to believe that they almost believe it to be. They believe it correct. In other words, they believe it so much in their own minds it becomes correct. It's like madness. You know what I mean? You're dealing with. I don't know. It's quite astonishing how your average Christian just doesn't know, is completely clueless as to the exact nature of the beast that they're dealing with here. It is unbelievable. They don't understand how this game works. They're completely clueless when it comes. I think they're just too trusting, far too trusting.
No, I definitely agree with that. So here's I was just scanning for comments here. Another one from, Daniel van Straten with the comments tonight. Will the state dictate? No, not this one. There was another one. There was another Daniel van Straten one, which I got mixed up. Where is it? Where the heck is it? But it was one about somebody was talking about the possibility of church surveillance. Oh no, here we go. It was right next to Daniel van Straten's. Okay, from Robin Goddard. So, does the South African government have the capacity to do China-style surveillance, or do you think it will be outsourced to the UN or China?
Well, are we talking about like surveillance of the churches or surveillance generally? Because I don't think you don't need to. It just takes a couple of, if we're talking specifically a church, for instance, they don't need to, because they've already got informants easily all over the place to, information informants that can do it that way. But on a broad scale, I don't think we've got the ability to. South African government will have the ability to do mass surveillance on its citizens as a whole.
No, I would generally agree with that. The problem with South Africa, even if they did have the desire to do something like that, is the corruption and patronage networks basically kneecap any sort of grand designs they may have. So through CADA deployment and all the corruption that goes with it, essentially there's I don't think there's any way that they could pull something like that off. They might try to, but like so many things here, what's written on the paper and what actually happens is usually pretty. There's usually a pretty stark difference between the two. But Louis the 17th says plenty of snitches in South Africa. Yeah, I don't know. All right.
Probably true.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, and also from Reactionary Opinions, what is the plan? I mean, how do we go about defeating this? Do we lock ranks as laymen? Do we reject church leadership? How? I'll take that one.
I don't know. Look, like I say, for instance, all I'm saying is that I'm not lending my ears to any state preacher. That's all I'm saying I'm doing. Everybody else must do what they do, but that's what I'm doing. It's just no ways I'm lending my ears to anybody that takes a license from the state. No one is. I'm not listening to some Babylonian preacher. Basically that's essentially mark of the beast.
Yeah.
And that is spiritual mark of the beast 101. That's clear as day. So every Christian must do what every Christian believes. But I will tell you now, that is mark of the beast stuff. You're worshipping the beast if your minister. You basically don't lend your ears to somebody like that. That's what I say. I say that for myself. Everybody will do what they do, but that's what I say.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're right there. So I guess we'll sort of end here now. Thank you very much for your questions, guys. And damn, we had a good audience here. I think this might have been a new record. We had 47 people live at once, which I think is that's progress. So apparently there's a lot of interest in this topic. Thank you very much, guys. Again, last call for any questions you may have. I guess sort of while we're wrapping up here, I'll shill once more. This channel has recently been approved by YouTube for super chats, and Subscribestar has also deemed Mr. Patriarch worthy of having a shot at that patronage money. So if you want to go, this is my Settler's Lament style shilling. If you want to go and support the patriarchy directly, you are highly encouraged to do so. And if we end up getting enough patronage money through there, we can reach peak patriarchal levels, and I can talk Mrs. Patriarch into quitting her job. So that would be fantastic. So yeah. Anyways, links in the description below. Yeah, and then I could be the true monarch of the house. That'll be great. Yeah. Okay.
Well, sure.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
so
thanks so much, Mr. Patriarch. It was great to be on the show. I'm glad that I brought all brought in the crowds. But yeah, it's
heck yeah.
Like I say, I tried to. It was a good, nice, broad chat about the church in general. In South Africa, it's probably something that you need to follow up, or even get into a specific area in the future, or something like that. We can maybe delve into some more details. But I think it was a good discussion on the broad aspects of Christianity in South Africa and the church, the broad church.
No, I absolutely agree. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and hit that like button. And I also forgot, I have another video coming out probably tomorrow. And it's going to be titled "The Problem with American Nationalism." So you're not going to want to miss that. It's going to be a nice edited video. It's probably going to come in around 10 minutes, and should raise some heckles, maybe a little bit, maybe not, but I think you guys will enjoy it. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Patriarch out.
Cheers, guys.